Margaret stood at the kitchen window, watching the autumn leaves dance in the October breeze. The golden light filtering through the glass reminded her of another time, another life one where David's laughter would fill this same space, where his arms would wrap around her waist as she prepared dinner. That was before. Before the cancer. Before the hospital visits. Before the silence that now echoed through their home like a constant reminder of what she'd lost. It had been 8 months since David passed away, and Margaret still found herself setting 2 plates at the dinner table, still reaching for his hand in the darkness of their bedroom. The grief came in waves, sometimes gentle, like a tide lapping at the shore, other times crashing over her with such force she could barely breathe. "Mum?" The voice behind her was gentle, concerned. Margaret turned to find her son Michael standing in the doorway, his dark hair tousled from sleep, his eyes so much like his father's filled with worry. At 28, he had his own apartment across town, his own life, his own dreams. But ever since David's death, he'd been spending more and more time at the house, as if he sensed the emptiness that threatened to swallow her whole. "I'm fine." "Sweetheart," Margaret said, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. She was functioning, surviving, but fine was a foreign concept these days. Michael stepped closer, and Margaret noticed how he'd filled out over the past few months. The boy who used to ask for help reaching the top shelf had grown into a man who now changed light bulbs she couldn't reach, who fixed the leaky faucet David had been meaning to repair, who held her when the loneliness became too much to bear. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said softly, his hand finding her shoulder. The touch was warm, comforting, and Margaret felt something stir within her, a feeling she immediately pushed away. It was grief, she told herself. Grief played tricks on the mind, made you crave human connection in ways that weren't always appropriate. But as Michael pulled her into a gentle embrace, Margaret couldn't deny the way her heart raced, the way his cologne, different from David's, but equally intoxicating, made her feel things she hadn't felt in years. It was wrong. She knew. He was her son, her baby boy who had scraped his knees and cried for her to kiss them better. But somewhere along the way, he'd become something else entirely, a source of strength, a protector, a man who looked at her with eyes that held depths she was afraid to explore. "I've been thinking," Michael said, his voice rumbling against her ear as they held each other. "Maybe I should move back in for a while. Just until you're feeling more like yourself again." Margaret's breath caught. The practical part of her mind screamed that it was a terrible idea, that the feelings swirling inside her were a recipe for disaster. But the lonely part of her, the part that had been aching for months, whispered that maybe it wouldn't be so bad to have someone to come home to again. "I don't want to be a burden," she said, pulling back to look at him. Michael's hands remained on her arms, his touch sending electricity through her body that she tried desperately to ignore. "You could never be a burden," he said, his eyes intense, searching. "You're my mother. You're the most important person in my world." There was something in the way he said it, something that made Margaret's pulse quicken. She wondered if he felt it too, this strange tension that had been building between them, this awareness that went beyond the typical mother-son relationship. Or was it all in her head, a product of grief and loneliness and the desperate need to feel desired again? That evening, as they sat together on the couch watching an old movie, Margaret found herself acutely aware of every point where their bodies touched. Michael's arm was stretched along the back of the sofa, his fingers occasionally brushing against her shoulder. When she shifted to get more comfortable, her leg pressed against his, and she felt him tense slightly. "Are you okay?" she asked, turning to face him. Michael's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Margaret saw something there that made her breath catch. It was desire, unmistakable and raw, quickly masked but not quickly enough. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice was strained. "I should probably head home soon." But he didn't move. Instead, he seemed to lean closer, his gaze dropping to her lips before snapping back to her eyes. Margaret felt her heart hammering against her ribs, felt the familiar flutter of attraction that she hadn't experienced since David's illness had stolen their intimacy. "Michael," she whispered, not sure if she was warning him away or drawing him closer. "I know," he said, his voice barely audible. "I know it's wrong. I know I shouldn't feel this way about you. But I can't help it, Mum. You're so beautiful, so strong, and watching you hurt, ... it's killing me." Margaret's world tilted. She'd suspected, had felt the undercurrent of something more than familial love in his touches, his looks, his constant presence. But hearing him say it out loud made it real, made it a choice she'd have to make rather than a feeling she could ignore. "We can't," she said. But even as the words left her mouth, she wasn't sure she believed them. "Why not?" Michael asked, his hand moving to cup her face. "We're both adults. We both feel something here. Dad's gone, Mom. He's been gone for 8 months, and you're still young, still alive. Don't you deserve to feel good again?" Margaret closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite herself. It had been so long since someone had looked at her with desire, since gentle hands had touched her skin with reverence instead of medical necessity. David's last months had been consumed by pain and treatments, by the slow erosion of the man. She'd married. She'd been his caregiver, his nurse, his strong support system. But she hadn't been his lover, hadn't been desired or wanted in the most primal way. "It's not that simple," she said, opening her eyes to find Michael watching her with an intensity that made her shiver. "It could be," he said, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. "I've been thinking about this for months, Mom. About how to make you smile again, how to take away the sadness in your eyes. I want to take care of you the way Dad did. I want to love you the way you deserve to be loved." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. The offer was tempting, so tempting. Michael was gentle and kind, strong and protective. He knew her better than anyone, understood her moods and needs. In another life, if they'd met under different circumstances, she might have fallen for him easily. But this life, their life, was complicated by history and blood and the weight of societal expectations. What would people think? She asked, voicing one of her fears. Who cares what people think? Michael replied, his other hand finding hers. The only opinions that matter are ours. And I know in my heart that what I feel for you is real. It's not just grief or loneliness or some twisted Oedipal complex. It's love, Mom. Pure, honest love. Margaret searched his face, looking for any sign of confusion or misplaced emotion. But all she saw was certainty, maturity, and a love so deep it took her breath away. "I need time," she said finally. It's overwhelming." Michael nodded, though disappointment flickered in his eyes. "I understand. But I'm not going anywhere. I'll wait as long as you need." He kissed her forehead then, a soft, lingering touch that felt more intimate than any kiss she'd shared with David in his final years. When he pulled away, Margaret felt the loss like a physical ache. "I should go," Michael said, standing. "But I meant what I said about moving back in. Even if nothing happens between us, I want to be here for you. As your son, as your friend, as whatever you need me to be." After he left, Margaret sat in the silence of her empty house, her mind racing. She thought about David, about the vows they'd made, about the life they'd built together. But she also thought about the future, about the years stretching ahead, of her, about the possibility of love and companionship and the simple joy of being held by someone who truly cared. Over the next few days, Michael kept his promise. He moved back into his childhood bedroom, settling into a routine that felt both natural and charged with possibility. He cooked breakfast while she got ready for work, helped with household chores, and spent evenings keeping her company. To anyone watching, they might have looked like a normal family, a son helping his widowed mother through a difficult time. But Margaret felt the undercurrent of tension in every interaction. The way Michael's hand lingered when he passed her coffee in the morning, the way his eyes followed her as she moved through the house, the way he found excuses to touch her, a hand on her back as he moved around her in the kitchen, a gentle squeeze of her shoulder when she seemed sad, a hug that lasted just a moment too long. She found herself responding in ways that surprised her, wearing prettier clothes, taking more care with her appearance, feeling a flutter of excitement when she heard his key in the door. She caught herself watching him too, admiring the way his shirt stretched across his shoulders, the way his laugh lit up his entire face, the way his hands moved with such gentleness and precision. It was a Thursday evening when everything changed. Margaret had been having a particularly difficult day, missing David with an intensity that left her breathless. She'd come home from work to find Michael in the kitchen, preparing her favorite meal. The simple kindness of the gesture broke something open inside her, and she found herself crying not the delicate tears she'd grown accustomed to, but deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from her very soul. Michael was beside her. In an instant, pulling her into his arms, murmuring soft words of comfort. But this time, when she looked up at him through her tears, she saw not just her son, but a man who loved her, who wanted to heal her, who was offering her a second chance at happiness. "I can't keep pretending," she whispered against his chest. "Pretending? What?" Michael asked, his voice tight with hope and fear. "That I don't feel it too," she said, pulling back to look at him. "That I don't see you as more than just my son. That I don't want ... She couldn't finish the sentence, but Michael understood. His hands framed her face, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Margaret's answer came not in words but in action. She rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his, soft and tentative at first, then with growing confidence as he responded. The kiss was everything she'd forgotten she needed, passionate, tender, full of promise and possibility. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard, their foreheads pressed together. "I love you," Michael said, his voice rough with emotion. "Not just as your son, but as a man who wants to spend the rest of his life making you happy." "I love you too," Margaret replied, the words feeling both foreign and perfectly natural. "I don't know how this works, or what it means, or what people will think, but I know that I've been dead inside for months, and you make me feel alive again." Michael smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. "We'll figure it out together, one day at a time." As he led her upstairs that night, Margaret felt a complex mix of emotions, guilt and excitement, fear and hope, grief for the past and anticipation for the future. She thought about David, about the love they'd shared, about the man who would want nothing more than her happiness. She thought about the son who had become her salvation, who had seen her at her lowest and loved her anyway. The months that followed were a delicate dance of discovery. They learned each other in new ways, not just as mother and son, but as lovers, as partners, as two people who had found something unexpected and precious in the midst of loss. Margaret bloomed under Michael's attention. her laughter returning, her smile brighter than it had been in years. They were careful, discreet. To the outside world, they were simply a close family weathering tragedy together. But behind closed doors they built a love that was deep and sustaining, complicated but real. There were moments of doubt, times when the weight of their situation felt overwhelming. But Michael's devotion never wavered. His love never diminished. He showed her in countless ways that she was cherished, desired, worthy of the kind of love she'd thought was lost forever. On the anniversary of David's death, they visited his grave together. Margaret placed flowers on the headstone and whispered a prayer of gratitude for the love they'd shared, for the son he'd given her, for the strength to keep living even when living seemed impossible. "Do you think he'd understand?" she asked Michael as they walked back to the car. Michael considered the question seriously. "I think Dad loved you more than anything in this world. And I think he'd want you to be happy. No matter what form that happiness takes." Margaret nodded, feeling a sense of peace settle over her. She knew their love was unconventional, knew it challenged societal norms and expectations. But she also knew it was real, was healing, was a second chance at the kind of deep connection she thought was lost forever. As they drove home together, Margaret reached over and took Michael's hand. He squeezed her fingers gently, and she felt the familiar flutter of love and desire that had become as natural as breathing. She had lost her husband, her partner, her first great love. But from that loss had come something unexpected, a different kind of love, complicated and beautiful and utterly transformative. Michael had become her everything, and what he'd done choosing to love her completely, courageously, despite the odds, had shocked her in the most wonderful way. In the end, Margaret realized love wasn't about following rules or meeting expectations. It was about finding connection in the midst of isolation, hope in the midst of despair, and the courage to embrace happiness wherever it might be found. And she had found it in the most unexpected place of all, in the heart of the son who had become her salvation, her second chance, her everything.